No one at the sanctuary believed this would end well. 3 meters apart stood two lives that should never have met like this. On one side, a full-grown male lion, silent, confused, a predator who hadn't roared in years. On the other, a newborn cub, barely 3 days old, abandoned by fate and running out of time. If the lion reacted on instinct, the cub would die. If he didn't react at all, the cub would still die. As the tiny cub began to crawl forward, crying for a parent he would never know, the lion did something that made everyone freeze. He didn't roar, he didn't attack, he didn't turn away. Instead, he lowered himself to the ground, and in the next 60 seconds, a lion who had forgotten who he was about to be called Dad. No one spoke as the late afternoon sun hung low over the Arizona desert, turning the dry grass a muted gold. The enclosure was silent in a way that felt unnatural, as if even the wind had decided to wait. At the center of the neutral field sat Jack, a fully grown male lion, massive and unmistakably powerful, his tawny coat catching the light. He weighed close to 200 kilograms, yet at that moment he looked smaller somehow, folded inward, his body still, his amber eyes dull with something that looked like confusion rather than instinct. 3 meters away, Dr. Hannah Miller knelt slowly, careful not to make any sudden movement. Her arms cradled a bundle so small it seemed almost impossible that it belonged in the same world as the lion before her. The cub was barely 3 days old. His name was Noah. He was all bones and fragile warmth, his tiny chest fluttering with shallow breaths, his thin cry trembling with exhaustion and need. He had already survived more in 72 hours than most creatures ever should. Hannah could feel his heart beat against her forearm, quick and uneven. She had felt this before, too many times. The edge where science ended and hope took over. She knew the numbers, she knew the studies, she knew that orphaned cubs who failed to bond in their first days rarely survived long, even when every physical need was met. And she knew something else that made her throat tighten as she glanced at Jack. If this went wrong, it would go wrong fast. Jack did not move. He did not stand. He did not bare his teeth or flatten his ears. He did not roar. He simply watched, his head tilted slightly, the way he often did when faced with something he could not place. Hannah had seen that look before. She had seen it when Jack was introduced to enrichment toys he did not understand, and when other lions approached him at the fence line months ago. It was the look of an animal searching for a rule that never came. Behind Hannah, just beyond the boundary, a small group of staff stood frozen. Mark Reynolds, the sanctuary's operations manager, had his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. He had argued against this moment until his voice had gone hoarse. Every protocol they lived by said this was reckless. A grown male lion and a newborn cub. Nature did not forgive mistakes like this. 60 seconds. Hannah had said earlier, her voice steady even though her hands were not. If there's any sign of aggression, we intervene. Now those seconds had begun. She lowered Noah carefully onto the ground. The cub wobbled as his paws touched the grass, his legs barely strong enough to support him. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The distance between him and Jack might as well have been an ocean. Hannah held her breath, aware of every sound in her own body, the rush of blood in her ears, the ache behind her eyes. Then Noah lifted his head. His eyes were barely open, still cloudy with the blue-gray haze of newborns, but his nose twitched. He sniffed the air, drawn by something ancient and undeniable. Warmth. Fur. The unmistakable scent of a large adult lion. Without hesitation, he let out a thin, high-pitched cry that cut through the silence like a blade. It was not fear. It was need. The cry echoed across the enclosure, small but piercing, the kind of sound evolution had designed to be impossible to ignore. Jack's ears flicked. Hannah felt her heart slam against her ribs. That single movement was more than she had seen from him in minutes. Jack leaned forward slightly, his massive paw shifting in the grass. His gaze locked onto the tiny creature before him, and for the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not hunger, not dominance. Confusion, yes, but layered with curiosity, and something else she could not yet name. Noah cried again and began to crawl. His movements were clumsy and determined, his small body dragging itself forward inch by inch. He did not look back. He did not hesitate. Everything in him was aimed at the large, golden presence ahead. He was doing exactly what his instincts told him to do. Find the adult. Find safety. Find the one who could keep him alive. Jack remained still. Every person watching understood the stakes. If Jack swatted him, even gently, the cub's fragile body would not withstand it. If Jack recoiled or turned away, Noah would be left without the contact his brain desperately needed. Either way, this experiment would end in heartbreak. Hannah's fingers curled into the grass. She had dedicated her life to understanding animal behavior, to respecting the line between intervention and hubris. Crossing that line had never felt heavier than it did now. Noah reached Jack's paw. He pressed his tiny head against the thick fur, rubbing his face clumsily as another cry escaped him. Softer this time, almost pleading. The sound seemed to ripple through Jack's body. His eyes widened. He lowered his head and sniffed the cub. Slowly, carefully, as if afraid that moving too fast might shatter something. Time stretched. Then, with deliberate slowness, Jack bent his front legs and lowered his entire body to the ground. A collective gasp rose from the observers before anyone could stop it. Jack lay down fully, his massive frame creating a wall of warmth and shelter. He shifted just enough to make space, exposing his chest and foreleg. Noah did not hesitate. He crawled into the opening, burrowing instinctively into the fur, his cries dissolving into a soft, contented sound. Within seconds, the cub fell asleep. Jack froze. He did not move his leg. He did not adjust his position. He simply stayed there, his muscles taut, his breathing shallow, as if he were afraid that any movement might break the fragile life now pressed against him. His eyes lifted, meeting Hannah's across the enclosure. They were wide, searching, almost questioning. Is this real? Tears blurred Hannah's vision. She nodded once, unable to trust her voice. If you're still with us, you're part of a remarkable community here at Whispering Hearts, where real stories of extraordinary animal connections come to life. Every subscriber helps us share more heart-touching moments that reveal the power of compassion across species. Don't forget to hit subscribe, because the journey ahead is one you'll feel long after the story ends. No one moved for a long time after that. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the field, but Jack remained exactly as he was, guarding the tiny life that had chosen him without knowing why. For the first time since he had arrived at the sanctuary, Jack was not waiting for instruction or approval. He was simply there. And in that stillness, something had begun that no one watching would ever forget. Long before Jack lay motionless in the Arizona grass, with a sleeping cub tucked against his chest, he had been a very different creature. Small, fragile, and alone in a world already on fire. The first reports came in during the height of wildfire season in northern Nevada. A lightning strike, followed by dry winds and weeks without rain, had turned thousands of acres into an inferno. Fire crews moved fast, but the flames moved faster. By the time Ryan Cole and his team arrived at the edge of the burn zone, the land looked like something scorched out of time itself. Trees stood blackened and hollow. The air smelled of ash and metal. Life, where it still existed, hid low and silent. Ryan was a firefighter by training, but rescue work had a way of blurring lines. You didn't stop seeing victims once the flames were out. You just found them later, quieter, smaller, and often too late. They found Jack near what had once been a shallow ravine. His mother lay a short distance away, her body still, her fur singed. Ryan knew immediately she hadn't abandoned her cub. She had stayed until the very end. Jack was pressed against her side, barely moving, his tiny chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. His eyes were open, but unfocused, glazed with shock and dehydration. Ryan remembered kneeling there longer than he should have. Fires don't wait, and neither do orders. But something about that cub, how quiet he was, how he didn't cry even as hands reached for him, made Ryan hesitate. He wrapped Jack in his jacket and carried him out, telling himself it was temporary. Stabilize him. Find a facility. Do what the protocol said. Protocol, however, did not prepare him for what came next. Jack survived the first critical days against all odds. He drank from a bottle with surprising calm, never thrashing, never resisting. He slept curled against Ryan's chest whenever he was allowed. The veterinarians warned Ryan early. The cub was too young. The separation window had already closed. Whatever instincts Jack should have learned from his mother were gone before they had a chance to form. Ryan heard the words, nodded, and told himself love would be enough. For a while, it seemed like it was. Jack grew quickly, his paws comically large, his fur thick and healthy. He followed Ryan everywhere, padding behind him like a shadow. He learned routines instead of instincts. He ate when bowls appeared. He slept when lights went out. He responded to his name the way a dog might, lifting his head and flicking his ears when Ryan called. What Jack never did was roar. As he grew, the absence became impossible to ignore. Other lions Ryan visited during transfers or consultations moved with a confidence Jack lacked. They stalked. They vocalized. They carried themselves like predators who knew exactly what they were. Jack did not. He made soft, breathy sounds when he was content. When startled, he froze instead of posturing. When confronted with new environments, he looked not to the land, but to the nearest human, searching for cues that never came naturally to a lion. Ryan tried everything he could think of: larger enclosures, natural terrain, limited human contact. But the damage was already done, carved into Jack's development during those first irreplaceable weeks. Jack had learned safety, but not identity. The first introduction to other lions happened when Jack was just over a year old. Ryan had driven for hours to a partner facility, hopeful and anxious in equal measure. The staff prepared the area carefully, creating visual barriers and escape routes. They had done this many times before. Jack stepped into the enclosure and immediately stopped. Across the space, another young male lion paced confidently, his tail flicking, his head high. He let out a low, testing rumble. Jack's response was instant and heartbreaking. He backed away until he pressed himself against the fence, his body trembling. He made a thin, distressed sound that had no place in the mouth of a lion, his size. They ended the session within minutes. They tried again, weeks later, then again months after that. Different locations, different lions. Every attempt ended the same way. Jack did not grow curious or defensive. He grew terrified. The presence of his own kind did not awaken something familiar. It overwhelmed him. By the time Jack reached adulthood, the truth Ryan had been avoiding finally settled into place. Jack could not be released. He could not join a pride. He could not live in the wild. Keeping him on private land was no longer safe or ethical. Letting him go was the hardest decision Ryan ever made. The day Jack was transported to the Arizona sanctuary was clear and bright. Ryan stood by the trailer longer than necessary, one hand resting against the metal. Jack looked back at him through the bars, his amber eyes searching, confused. He did not roar in protest. He did not resist. He simply waited, as he always had, for someone to tell him what came next. Ryan had no answer to give. At the sanctuary, Jack's behavior puzzled everyone. He was calm with staff, almost unnervingly so. He followed caretakers at a distance, watching their movements with quiet intensity. He accepted food but showed little interest in it. He ignored enrichment designed to stimulate hunting instincts. He slept often, stretched out and still as though conserving energy he had no reason to use. Dr. Hannah Miller noticed it immediately. This was not aggression. It wasn't even fear anymore. It was absence. Jack did not know what to do when no one was asking anything of him. He had learned how to belong to people. He had never learned how to belong to himself. Weeks passed, then months. Jack's physical health remained stable, but his spirit faded. He stopped exploring his enclosure. He spent long hours staring toward the staff buildings, waiting for someone who never came. When other lions roared in the distance, Jack lifted his head and listened, his chest rising with a breath that never turned into sound. He opened his mouth once, as if trying to remember something. Nothing came out. By the time Hannah received the call about a newborn cub in New Mexico, Jack had been at the sanctuary long enough for everyone to accept an unspoken truth. He would live out his days safely, quietly, never dangerous, never whole. No one imagined that within days a tiny voice would call him something he had never been. Dad. At first, no one wanted to say the word out loud. Jack was healthy by every measurable standard. His coat was thick and clean. His weight remained stable. His blood work came back normal. If you glanced at his chart without context, you would see a textbook example of a well-managed adult male lion living in a reputable sanctuary. That was the version the numbers told. The version Dr. Hannah Miller saw every morning was different. Jack no longer explored his enclosure. In the early weeks after his arrival, he had at least walked its perimeter, sniffing cautiously, mapping the space the way lions were meant to do. Now he rarely ventured more than a few yards from the same patch of ground. He lay there for hours, his body stretched out, his eyes open but unfocused. When staff arrived with food, he rose slowly, ate just enough to be polite, and lay back down again. He did not greet the day with anticipation. He endured it. Hannah began spending more time near his enclosure, not as an observer, but as a witness. She watched the subtle details others missed. The way Jack lifted his head when he heard human footsteps but ignored the distant calls of other lions. The way his ears flicked at voices but remained flat at the sounds of prey animals moving beyond the fence. His attention had been trained, not chosen. "He's calm," one of the junior caretakers remarked one afternoon, almost admiringly. Hannah didn't respond right away. Calm was not the word she would have used. Calm suggested peace. What she saw in Jack was resignation. They tried enrichment again, hoping repetition might spark something dormant. Scent trails were laid across the enclosure, fresh meat hidden beneath leaves and brush. A mechanical lure mimicked the unpredictable movements of prey. Jack approached each offering with the same detached curiosity, sniffing briefly before stepping back and sitting down as if waiting for instructions that never arrived. When they introduced a carcass with fur intact, a standard practice designed to trigger natural feeding behavior, Jack recoiled slightly. He sniffed once, then turned his head away and sat down. He did not eat until the fur was removed. That was the moment Hannah felt the tight knot form in her chest. This wasn't stubbornness, it wasn't preference, it was something deeper and more troubling. Jack wasn't rejecting wild behavior because he didn't like it. He didn't recognize it as his own. The sanctuary's operations manager, Mark Reynolds, saw the situation through a different lens. Mark had spent decades balancing compassion with risk. He believed deeply in the sanctuary's mission, but he also believed in limits. Jack made him uneasy, not because he was aggressive, but because he wasn't. "He's not failing," Mark said during one of their meetings, tapping Jack's file with a pen. "He's stable. We've got lions here who came in half dead, missing limbs, traumatized beyond repair. Jack's fine." Hannah met his gaze steadily. He's not fine. He's fading. Mark sighed. He's safe. That's the goal. For how long? Hannah asked. What happens when safety turns into stagnation? Mark leaned back in his chair. We give him a quiet life. There's nothing wrong with that. But Hannah knew there was. Depression in animals was not a controversial concept anymore. It was documented, measurable, and often misunderstood. It didn't always look like despair. Sometimes it looked like compliance, like an animal who stopped trying because trying had never worked. Jack followed the rules perfectly, and that terrified her. At night, when the sanctuary settled into its rhythms, Hannah reviewed footage from the enclosure cameras. She watched Jack during the hours no one else did. He paced occasionally, but without purpose. He lay down and stared at the fence line that separated him from the staff buildings, his body angled toward the sounds of human activity. He slept lightly, waking at every noise, as if expecting someone to call his name. They never did. When other lions roared in the distance, Jack lifted his head and listened. Hannah could see his chest expand as he drew in breath. His mouth opened slightly. Then he closed it again. No sound came out. Hannah consulted colleagues across the country, behavioral specialists, wildlife psychologists, sanctuary directors who had seen more cases than she could count. The consensus came back quickly and without comfort. Jack's early imprinting had overwritten his instinctual framework. Without a pride, without a role, without something or someone to orient his behavior around, there was little chance of recovery. Some animals, one specialist told her gently, exist between worlds. We manage their needs. We don't cure them. Hannah closed her laptop and stared at the dark screen, Jack's reflection faintly visible behind her. She had dedicated her career to understanding animals on their own terms, not reshaping them to fit human expectations. Accepting that Jack's story might already be over felt like a betrayal of everything she believed. Mark noticed the change in her almost immediately. "You're getting attached," he said one evening as they stood watching Jack from the observation deck. "I'm paying attention," Hannah replied. "There's a difference." Hannah didn't argue. She didn't need to. The evidence lived in the enclosure below them, breathing slowly, doing nothing wrong and everything wrong at once. The conversation about Jack's future became unavoidable. "We need to be realistic," Mark said during a staff meeting. "He's not a candidate for integration. He's not a candidate for release. He's not dangerous, but that doesn't mean he's thriving. Our responsibility is to keep him safe and stable. That may be all we can do." No one disagreed out loud. After the meeting, Hannah stayed behind. She watched the staff file out, their voices low, their expressions careful. Everyone cared. That was the problem. Caring didn't always come with solutions. That night she walked the perimeter of Jack's enclosure alone. The stars were bright, the desert air cool. Jack lifted his head as she approached, his eyes following her movements. She stopped a few feet from the fence. "I don't know what you need," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "But I know this isn't it." Jack blinked slowly and rested his head back on his paws. 2 days later, the phone rang. Hannah answered without knowing that the quiet, unbearable stillness she had been living with was about to shatter. She listened as a voice on the other end explained a situation unfolding hundreds of miles away in New Mexico. A lioness, a difficult birth, a cub who had survived against the odds but was running out of time. As she listened, Hannah's gaze drifted back to Jack. He was standing now, watching her intently. For the first time in months, something in his expression looked like anticipation, and Hannah felt, deep in her chest, the unsettling realization that Jack's story might not be ending at all. It might be waiting. The voice on the phone was calm, professional, and already tired in the way people sound when they have repeated the same bad news too many times. "This is Dr. Elaine Porter from the Mesa Verde Wildlife Center in New Mexico," the woman said. "We had a lioness go into labor early this morning. First pregnancy. Complications we couldn't correct in time." Hannah closed her eyes briefly, already understanding where this was going. "The mother didn't survive," Dr. Porter continued. "The cub did. Barely." Hannah pressed the phone tighter to her ear and turned away from the observation window. Jack was still standing below, his attention fixed on her, as if he sensed the gravity of the moment. She forced herself to focus on the voice speaking. "How old?" Hannah asked. "Less than 48 hours," Dr. Porter replied. "Male, undersized, dehydrated. We stabilized him, but he's weak, and that's the problem." Hannah knew the words before they were spoken. "He needs a bond," Dr. Porter said quietly. "Soon. If we keep him on a bottle without maternal contact, his chances drop dramatically. Even if he survives physically, the psychological damage can be severe." Hannah leaned against the wall, the weight of the conversation settling into her bones. "You don't have a nursing lioness?" "No," Dr. Porter said. "We've called everyone we can. No suitable females. Not here, not nearby." The silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. "I'm calling because I know you've worked with complex behavioral cases," Dr. Porter added. "I don't know if you have options we don't, but if we can't find a solution in the next day or two..." Her voice trailed off. Hannah looked back through the glass at Jack. He had lowered himself to the ground again, his massive body folding neatly into itself. He rested his head on his paws, eyes still on her. "I'll call you back," Hannah said. "Soon." She ended the call and stood there longer than necessary, staring at the dark screen of her phone. A newborn cub in New Mexico, a lion who didn't know he was a lion in Arizona. Two broken stories that should never intersect. And yet, she didn't bring the idea up right away. She walked instead, letting the desert air cool her racing thoughts. She replayed the clinical facts in her mind, as if logic might drown out the dangerous spark of possibility forming beneath them. Jack had never shown parental behavior. He had never even shown proper social behavior with other lions. The risks were enormous. Still, the image wouldn't leave her. The way Jack's eyes followed her, the way he listened. That evening, she sat down with Thomas Grant, one of the sanctuary's most experienced caretakers. Thomas had worked with big cats for over 30 years. He had seen animals come in shattered and leave whole, and he had seen others fade no matter how much effort was poured into them. He knew Jack well. "There's a cub," Hannah said without preamble. "Orphaned, newborn, needs a bond or he won't make it." Thomas nodded slowly. And we don't have a female." Thomas didn't respond right away. He sipped his coffee, eyes distant, thoughtful. "You're thinking about Jack." Hannah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I haven't said that." "You didn't need to," Thomas replied. "You wouldn't be sitting here if you weren't." Hannah shook her head. "It sounds insane when you say it out loud." Thomas set his cup down. "Most things that matter do." She looked at him sharply. "You think this could work?" "I think," Thomas said carefully, "that Jack is lost because he has nothing to orient himself around. No role, no purpose. He doesn't know what he's supposed to be. But babies..." He paused, choosing his words. "Babies have a way of pulling instinct out of places we don't expect." "Or getting themselves killed," Hannah said. Thomas didn't disagree. "That's the risk." The discussion grew louder the next morning. Mark Reynolds called an emergency meeting as soon as Hannah briefed him. His reaction was immediate and unfiltered. "Absolutely not," he said flatly. "This isn't a movie. This is a sanctuary with responsibility and liability. You're talking about putting a helpless newborn in front of an adult male lion who doesn't even display normal species behavior." Hannah stood her ground. "I'm talking about giving two animals a chance they don't have anywhere else." Mark folded his arms. Jack doesn't roar, he doesn't assert, he doesn't even interact appropriately with other lions. And you want to make him a parent? I want to give him a reason to be one, Hannah replied. This is reckless, Mark said. If something goes wrong. If we do nothing, Hannah interrupted, the cub dies, and Jack continues exactly as he is, slowly disappearing while we congratulate ourselves on keeping him safe. The room fell silent. Finally, Mark exhaled sharply. If you do this, it's one attempt. Controlled. Neutral territory. Full supervision. At the first sign of danger, we pull the cub out. Hannah nodded. Agreed. Arrangements were made quickly. Dr. Porter agreed to transport the cub, now named Noah for ease of identification. He arrived wrapped in a soft blanket, impossibly small against the sterile equipment of the clinic. Hannah took one look at him and felt her resolve harden. He was alive, but just barely. His tiny body shook when he cried, the sound thin and desperate. She carried him herself. As she walked toward the neutral enclosure, the weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her. Jack was already there, led gently into position by Thomas. He sat exactly where he was guided, obedient as always, waiting. Jack had no idea what was coming. Hannah stepped into the open space, Noah warm and fragile in her arms. She could feel his heartbeat fluttering against her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to protect him, to keep him away from danger. Instead, she took a step forward, then another. She lowered herself to the ground and placed Noah carefully onto the grass. And in that moment, with the desert holding its breath and every rule she had ever learned hanging in the balance, Hannah understood something with startling clarity. This wasn't about teaching Jack how to be a lion. It was about seeing whether being needed could remind him. Hannah had broken rules before, not recklessly, not for ego or impulse, but in those rare moments when following them felt more dangerous than bending them. Still, as she stood at the edge of the neutral enclosure with Noah pressed against her chest, she understood this was different. This was not a calculated deviation. This was a leap. The plan was simple on paper. One controlled introduction, 90 seconds. No territorial advantage. No food present. No unnecessary movement. Thomas would remain closest to Jack, ready to intervene if the lion showed the slightest sign of agitation. Hannah would place the cub and step back. Mark would be watching from the observation platform, already tense, already prepared to end the experiment. No one spoke as Hannah entered the enclosure. Jack was seated where Thomas had guided him, his posture calm, almost obedient. He looked like a lion waiting for a command, not an animal governed by instinct. His tail lay still behind him, his breathing slow and measured. If Hannah had not known his history, she might have mistaken him for relaxed. She knew better. Jack was not relaxed. He was uncertain. Hannah knelt carefully, every movement deliberate. Noah stirred in her arms, releasing a faint cry as the change in position disrupted his fragile sense of warmth and security. The sound made Hannah's chest tighten. She whispered nothing. There were no words that could prepare him for what was about to happen. She placed Noah on the ground. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The distance between Jack and the cub was short, but the tension stretched it wide. Hannah rose slowly and took 3 steps back, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Jack did not move. His gaze was fixed on the cub, his head tilted slightly, ears forward. He did not bare his teeth. He did not lower his ears. He did not growl. He simply watched as though trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. Noah's cry grew louder. It was thin and uneven, the sound of an animal that had no defenses left. His tiny body trembled as he shifted his weight forward, his legs unsteady. He stopped, cried again, and then began to crawl, dragging himself across the grass toward the only presence his instincts recognized. Jack's paw twitched. Thomas stiffened but did not move. Hannah felt time stretch, each second thick and heavy. She knew that if Jack struck out now, there would be no chance to stop it. She knew that Mark was already counting down in his head. Noah reached Jack's shadow. The cub pressed his head against Jack's foreleg, his cries turning softer, more rhythmic, as if reassured by the contact. He rubbed his face clumsily against the thick fur, scent-marking in the way newborns do without understanding what it means. His small body curved instinctively toward warmth and protection. Jack lowered his head. The movement was slow, almost hesitant. He sniffed the cub once, then again, drawing in the scent with a focus Hannah had never seen from him before. His eyes widened slightly, not with alarm, but with something closer to recognition. Jack lifted his paw. Mark inhaled sharply. The paw hovered, uncertain, then touched the ground beside Noah instead of on him. Jack shifted his weight, muscles bunching, then released the tension and lowered himself down. His massive body folded to the earth, forelegs stretched forward, chest exposed. He lay still, creating space without seeming to realize he was doing it. Noah wasted no time. He crawled forward, tucking himself against Jack's chest, his head disappearing into the thick fur beneath the lion's mane. His cry stopped almost immediately. A long, shuddering breath left his body, followed by another. Within seconds, his tiny form went slack with sleep. Jack froze. He did not adjust. He did not look away. He remained perfectly still, his muscles taut, his breathing shallow. It was as if he feared that moving would undo whatever fragile thing had just formed between them. Minutes passed. No one intervened. Hannah felt tears slide down her cheeks, unnoticed, unacknowledged. She had prepared herself for chaos, for danger, for the possibility of failure. She had not prepared herself for stillness. Jack's eyes lifted and found hers. They were wide and unguarded, stripped of the emptiness she had grown used to seeing. There was a question there, raw and unmistakable. "Is this allowed?" Hannah nodded slowly, her throat tight. She did not trust herself to speak. The 90 seconds passed, then another minute, then 5. Mark did not call an end to the session. Jack remained where he was, his body forming a living barrier around the cub. When a breeze stirred the grass, he shifted slightly, angling himself to block it. When Noah stirred in his sleep, Jack's head lowered, his nose brushing the cub's back in a gentle, instinctive check. No one had taught him this. Eventually, Thomas approached carefully, his movements slow and respectful. Jack's eyes followed him, alert but calm. Thomas stopped a few feet away, not wanting to intrude. "You're doing fine, big guy," he murmured, more to reassure himself than Jack. Jack did not look at him. His attention remained fixed on the small life pressed against his chest. Hannah realized then that something fundamental had already changed. Jack was no longer waiting to be told what to do. He was not looking to humans for direction or approval. For the first time since she had met him, his focus was not outward. It was inward and downward, toward the cub who had chosen him without hesitation. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the enclosure, Hannah made the decision she had not planned to make so soon. "We leave them," she said quietly. Mark turned to her, disbelief etched across his face. "You can't be serious." "I am," Hannah replied. "We monitor, we stay close, but we don't interrupt this." Jack shifted slightly, his leg falling asleep beneath the cub. He grimaced just a little, then stilled again, unwilling to move. Noah slept on, unaware that his survival had just rewritten the fate of the lion beneath him. That evening, as the sanctuary settled into its night routines, Jack remained in the same position. Hours passed, his muscles cramped, his breathing slowed. Still, he did not move. For the first time in his life, Jack was not alone, and for the first time no one could say what he would become next. The first night was chaos disguised as calm. Jack did not move from the spot where Noah slept against his chest. Long after the sun disappeared and the desert cooled, he remained stretched on the ground, his massive body rigid with effort. His leg went numb, his muscles cramped. Still, he stayed exactly where he was, as if the smallest shift might cause the tiny life pressed into his fur to vanish. Hannah watched from a distance, her exhaustion forgotten. She had arranged for monitoring equipment to be set discreetly around the enclosure, prepared to intervene at the first sign of trouble. But trouble never came in the way she expected. It came as hunger. Noah woke just before midnight, his cry sharp and insistent. It sliced through the quiet of the sanctuary, echoing off the walls. Jack jolted awake, his head snapping up in alarm. For a split second, panic crossed his face. He looked down at the cub, then around the enclosure, searching for someone to tell him what to do. No one came. Jack lowered his head and sniffed Noah, nudging him gently with his nose. The cub cried louder. Jack flinched, then did the only thing he could think of. He licked Noah's head, slow and careful, his rough tongue barely grazing the cub's fragile fur. Noah protested immediately. The sound made Jack freeze. He lifted his head and looked toward the observation area, his expression unmistakably pleading. Hannah stepped forward then, moving slowly, keeping her body language calm. She knelt beside them and prepared the bottle she had readied hours earlier. Jack watched her with absolute focus, every muscle tense, every movement memorized. She fed Noah while Jack hovered close, his nose inches from the cub, his eyes tracking every swallow. When Noah finally settled, his cries fading into soft, rhythmic breaths, Jack released a long exhale that seemed to come from deep in his chest. The pattern repeated itself through the night. Every 2 hours, Noah woke and cried. Every time, Jack startled awake, his confusion giving way to determination. He tried different approaches, nudging, sniffing, licking, always gentle, always unsure. Each time Hannah intervened with the bottle, Jack watched, learned, and remembered. By dawn, something subtle had changed. The next time Noah cried, before Hannah could reach them, Jack did something no one expected. He carefully opened his mouth and lifted the cub by the scruff, awkward and unpracticed, but unmistakably instinctive. Noah dangled for a moment, surprised but unharmed, before Jack carried him a short distance and set him down in front of Hannah. Then Jack sat back and waited. The message was clear. Feed him. I know he needs this. Hannah wiped tears from her face as she knelt down. Jack's eyes never left Noah. He did not flinch when she reached in. He did not try to reclaim the cub. He trusted her, but more importantly, he trusted himself enough to ask for help. Over the next days, the sanctuary witnessed a transformation that was anything but smooth. Jack did not know how to carry Noah properly at first. His early attempts resulted in the cub sliding awkwardly in his mouth, tiny legs flailing in protest. Each time, Jack adjusted, more careful than before. By the end of the first week, he could transport Noah gently and confidently, placing him down with deliberate precision. Play was another challenge entirely. When Noah grew strong enough to bat clumsily at Jack's face and pounce on his paws, Jack froze. He understood somehow that this was play, but he had no framework for how to respond. His early attempts were hesitant, restrained to the point of stiffness. Then, slowly, he improvised. He tapped Noah lightly with one massive paw, just enough to send the cub tumbling harmlessly through the grass. Noah squealed in delight and scrambled back. Launching himself again, Jack tapped him again and again. A rhythm emerged, clumsy but joyful, theirs alone. Jack was learning by doing. One of the most profound changes came quietly, without anyone noticing at first. Jack had always slept on the raised platform the staff had built for him, the closest thing he had to the structured comfort of his early life. Noah could not climb it. One evening, without prompting, Jack abandoned the platform entirely. He lay down on the ground beside Noah, curling his body protectively around the cub, his mane shielding him from the cool night air. From that night on, Jack never returned to the platform. "This is where my child needs me." The sanctuary staff exchanged glances but said nothing. Some truths did not need commentary. The first test came unexpectedly. A neighboring male lion wandered too close to the enclosure, curious but not overtly aggressive. In the past, Jack would have retreated, his body folding inward in submission. This time, he did something else. He stood. Jack placed himself between Noah and the fence, his body tall and steady. A low sound rumbled in his chest. It was not the thin, breathy noise he used to make. It was deeper, grounded, real. The other lion paused, assessed, and stepped back. Jack did not pursue. He did not roar. He simply remained where he was, guarding the space that now mattered more than anything else. Mark Reynolds witnessed the exchange from a distance. He said nothing, but his expression shifted. The certainty he had carried for months began to crack. By the end of the second week, Jack was no longer waiting for cues. He anticipated Noah's needs. He checked the cub's position constantly, adjusting his own body to provide warmth or shade. When Noah slept, Jack slept lightly. When Noah stirred, Jack was already alert. Jack was still not a lion in the way textbooks described. But he was a father, and in becoming one, he was beginning to remember something older than training, older than fear. Something that had been buried beneath years of confusion and human expectation. He did not know it yet, but the sound he had forgotten was already stirring in his chest, waiting for the moment it would be needed most. The storm arrived without warning, the way desert storms often do. The afternoon had been unusually warm, the air heavy and still, pressing down on the sanctuary like a held breath. By evening, dark clouds rolled in from the horizon, swallowing the last light of the sun. Wind tore across the open land, rattling fences and bending the dry grass low. Somewhere far off, thunder cracked, sharp and sudden. Noah had never experienced anything like it. At just over 6 weeks old, his world had been limited to warmth, routine, and the steady presence of Jack. The first thunderclap sent his small body jerking awake. He cried out, a high, panicked sound that echoed across the enclosure. Jack reacted instantly. He rose to his feet and circled Noah, his movements quick but controlled. He lowered his head, nudging the cub close to his chest, trying to shield him from the whipping wind. Another thunderclap followed, louder this time, close enough that the ground seemed to tremble. Noah screamed. The sound was different from hunger or discomfort. This was pure fear. His body shook violently, his breathing rapid and uneven. Jack pressed himself tighter around him, his mane flattening against the cub's small frame, trying to block the noise, the rain, the chaos. It wasn't working. Jack tried everything he knew. He licked Noah's head, slow and repetitive, the way mothers soothe their young. He shifted his body to create a deeper shelter. He lowered his head and breathed warm air over the cub's back. Each time thunder rolled through the sky, Noah cried harder. Jack lifted his head and looked toward the staff. Buildings, eyes wide, desperate. No one came. Hannah was watching from the monitoring station, her heart in her throat. Protocol dictated that they let the situation play out, unless there was immediate danger. Emotion urged her to run. She stayed where she was. Another lightning bolt split the sky, illuminating the enclosure in stark white light. The thunder that followed was deafening. Noah's cry rose into a shrill wail, his tiny body rigid with terror. Jack froze. Something shifted in him then, deep and sudden, like a door breaking open after years of pressure. His chest expanded as he drew in a breath far deeper than any he had taken before. The sound that followed tore out of him without hesitation. He roared. It was not the roar of dominance or challenge. It was not a warning to rivals or a declaration of territory. It was a roar of protection, low and powerful, vibrating through the ground and the air itself. It cut through the storm, through the thunder, through the chaos, announcing a single, unmistakable truth. I am here. The sound rolled across the sanctuary, echoing off distant hills. Other lions lifted their heads in response, startled, alert. Staff members froze mid-step, eyes wide. Noah stopped crying. The change was immediate and complete. His body went still, his breathing slowed, and he lifted his head just long enough to press his face into Jack's mane. Within moments, he fell asleep, secure in a way he never had been before. Jack stood there in the rain, his body shielding the cub, his mane soaked and heavy. His eyes were bright, alive with something new and ancient all at once. He released another roar, softer this time, almost experimental, as if testing the sound in his own chest. It felt right. Hannah felt tears streaming down her face, unchecked. She had waited months for any sign of Jack's instincts returning. She had imagined gradual progress, tentative steps. She had not imagined this. The storm passed as quickly as it had come. By morning, the sky was clear, the air washed clean and cool. When Thomas arrived to check on the enclosure, he stopped short. Jack was sitting upright, alert and steady, Noah sprawled across his front paws, deeply asleep. Jack's posture was different now. There was no uncertainty in the way he held himself, no hesitation in his gaze. He looked at Thomas with calm confidence, then lowered his head to groom Noah gently. Thomas didn't speak. He didn't need to. Word spread quickly through the sanctuary. Mark arrived soon after, standing silently beside Hannah as they watched Jack move through his enclosure with a purpose no one had seen before. He paced the perimeter, marking boundaries. He responded to distant sounds with low rumbles, no longer silent, no longer unsure. I didn't think he had it in him, Mark said finally, his voice quiet. Hannah shook her head. He always did. He just didn't know why he needed it. The days that followed confirmed what the storm had awakened. Jack ate with renewed appetite, tearing into meat with focus and intent. He explored his territory, guiding Noah behind him, always positioning himself between the cub and anything unfamiliar. When Noah grew curious and wandered too far, Jack retrieved him gently, carrying him back by the scruff without hesitation. Other lions treated him differently now. A younger male approached once, testing, curious. Jack responded with a single, controlled growl. The other lion backed away immediately. Jack did not pursue. He did not need to. He had found his place. At night, when the sanctuary settled into its familiar rhythms, Jack remained vigilant. He slept lightly, waking at every unfamiliar sound, scanning the darkness. Noah slept soundly against him, untroubled, unaware that his father had once forgotten the very voice that now kept him safe. Hannah documented everything meticulously. She sent updates to colleagues who had once told her Jack's case was hopeless. Responses ranged from cautious skepticism to open amazement. Debates formed about hormones, neural pathways, and latent instinct. Hannah didn't care. What mattered was standing in front of her every day. A lion who had been silent now spoke when it mattered. A creature who had been lost now knew exactly who he was. Jack had not learned to roar. He had remembered, and he had remembered because someone needed him to protect, to stand, to speak into the storm. The hardest part of the journey was still ahead. But for the first time, Jack was ready. Noah grew quickly, the way healthy cubs do when the world makes sense to them. By the time the desert began to cool toward autumn, his legs were stronger, his movements surer. He no longer stayed tucked against Jack's chest all day. Curiosity pulled him outward, towards sounds and movement beyond the familiar circle of his father's body. He chased insects through the grass, pounced on shadows, and tested his balance on low rocks and fallen branches. Jack watched every step. He followed close enough to intervene, but not so close as to smother. When Noah stumbled, Jack was there. When the cubs scrambled back up, Jack stepped aside. It was a delicate balance, one Jack had never been taught and somehow understood anyway. The next challenge arrived quietly, without ceremony. The sanctuary housed several young lions not far from Jack's enclosure, cubs close to Noah's age who wrestled, chased, and learned the social rules that no parent could teach alone. Hannah had been watching them for weeks, weighing options she knew would come sooner rather than later. A cub raised in isolation, even with a devoted father, risked growing up incomplete in a different way. She dreaded the conversation. When she finally raised the subject with Mark and Thomas, Jack lay nearby, Noah pressed against his side. The cub's ears flicked at the sound of distant play, his body vibrating with interest. Jack heard it too. His posture changed immediately. His muscles tightened. He shifted subtly, placing himself between Noah and the fence line that separated them from the other cubs. The low rumble in his chest was not aggression. It was fear. Hannah felt it like a weight. Jack remembered his own failed introductions. The terror, the confusion, the overwhelming presence of lions he did not understand. He was not seeing other cubs. He was seeing danger. The first attempt was brief. They brought Jack and Noah to a viewing area, far enough away to feel safe, close enough for Noah to see. The other cubs tumbled in the grass, carefree and loud. Noah stood on his hind legs, front paws braced against the barrier, chirping with excitement. Jack blocked him. He nudged Noah back with his chest, then stood firm, his body a wall. Noah protested, confused, frustrated. Hannah called the session to an end within minutes. That night, Jack paced for hours. Hannah did not push. She knew better. Instead, she changed tactics. She spent time sitting near Jack and Noah during the viewing sessions, her body language relaxed, her presence steady. Thomas joined her. Together, they watched quietly, modeling calm where Jack expected threat. Days turned into weeks. Jack's tension eased by degrees so small they were almost invisible. He stopped blocking Noah's view. He allowed the cub to watch, though he stayed pressed close, ready. When one of the young lions yelped during rough play, Jack startled, but then paused, listening. The sound was familiar. It sounded like Noah when he tripped or fell. Not fear. Learning. The breakthrough came on a cool morning when a young male cub from the other group was pinned briefly by an older lioness and released just as quickly. The cub shook himself and bounded back into play, unharmed. Jack stood, alert, then slowly sat back down. Hannah exhaled. The fence line meetings began soon after. Noah and the other cubs batted at one another through the barrier, exchanging playful swats and vocalizations. Jack intervened often at first, stepping in whenever play escalated. But with time, those interventions grew fewer. Jack wasn't just allowing it. He was teaching. When Noah grew too aggressive, Jack corrected him with a firm nudge. When Noah hesitated, Jack encouraged him forward. Jack did not know the rules consciously, but his body knew them now. He was preparing his son for a world larger than himself. The first full introduction was scheduled carefully, planned down to the smallest detail. Neutral territory, one cub at a time. Staff positioned but unobtrusive. Jack would be allowed to observe, but not participate. On the morning of the introduction, Hannah noticed something that stopped her in her tracks. Jack was grooming Noah more thoroughly than usual, paying careful attention to the cub's growing mane. He stepped back and studied him, then groomed again. It was the behavior of a parent preparing a child for something important. When they reached the open field, Jack halted. He looked at the space ahead, then back at Hannah. Then he looked at Noah, who was vibrating with excitement, tail flicking, eyes bright. Jack made a low sound, complex and steady, and did something no one expected. He walked away. 30 meters back, he sat down and turned to face the field. Hannah's vision blurred. Jack had chosen, not out of fear, not out of submission, out of trust. Noah met the other cub cautiously at first. They circled, sniffed, then dropped into play almost simultaneously. They wrestled, tumbled, separated, and returned, learning the rhythms of interaction written into their species long before either of them was born. Jack did not move. Even when Noah yelped after a rough tumble, Jack stayed where he was. His muscles tensed, ready, but he did not intervene. He watched his son stand back up, shake himself, and rejoin the game. The session lasted an hour. When it ended, Noah ran back to Jack, chattering excitedly, rubbing against his legs. Jack sniffed him thoroughly, checking for injuries, then groomed his head with deliberate care. They walked away together, Noah still buzzing with energy, Jack moving with the quiet exhaustion of a parent who had just survived a milestone. The months that followed were filled with gradual change. Noah began spending more time with the other cubs, learning, growing, pushing boundaries. Jack spent more time alone, but not empty. He patrolled his territory, interacted confidently with other lions, and rested without the old hollow stillness. The first night Noah spent away from him was hard. Jack paced. He called softly. He slept little. When Noah returned the next morning, dirty and exuberant, Jack's tension eased. He listened as his son rubbed against him, full of stories Jack could not understand but clearly accepted. By the time Noah was nearly grown, he split his days between his peers and his father. He always came back. One golden afternoon, years after that first impossible meeting, Hannah stood at the observation deck with Mark and Thomas. Noah played in the distance with other lions, strong and confident. Jack rested beneath his favorite tree. Noah glanced back. Jack lifted his head. Their eyes met. The message was simple. I see you. I'm here. As the sun dipped low, Noah trotted back and settled beside his father. Jack draped a massive paw over his son's shoulder, a familiar gesture now, heavy with meaning. Jack had once forgotten how to roar. Then an orphan cub had called him Dad, and in answering that call, Jack had found his voice, his purpose, and himself. They slept there as night fell, father and son, exactly where they belonged.